So without further ado, I'd just like to invite our live speakers onto stage, Professor David Chan, Dr. Julian Tang, and our moderator, David Reed. As they come on stage, I'd just like to remind everyone that you can continue to raise your questions through the Q&A function on the app itself, on the platform itself, so please do that. Without further ado, I'll hand the time over to David Reed, who's going to take you through as the moderator of the session. David, please.
Thanks, Nathaniel. Got our panelists. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. My name's David Reed. I'm from Lloyd's Register Foundation. So you probably heard our name a few times today. We're one of the co-creators or the co-founders of the Institute for the Public Understanding of Risk at NUS. Lloyd's Register Foundation is an independent global charity. We focus mainly on safety in the world. So our mission is to try and make the world a safer place. And risk is obviously very important to us. One of the things that we're really interested in is the connection between public behavior, so public understanding of risk and safety, the way people behave and the actions they take, and can that lead to people actually being safer? So does the way that people think and feel about risk or safety actually make a difference in them being safer? And this is an area that for the last 3 years we've been investigating and researching to try and understand how do we create better interventions that make the world a safer place. And so this conversation about trust and confidence and the importance of good communication in keeping people safe or in understanding risk and improving how people respond to risks and the risks that we face in society is one that we're very interested in because we don't really know how that works. We don't know at the moment, how do we build that trust? How do we communicate better? And how does that lead to the public and governments and businesses and the media actually taking better actions? And it's not as simple as it seems. I think Pablo earlier said that one of the things that doesn't work in risk communication is telling people what the science says. So you have great science and great data, but Pablo said earlier that actually you tell people that and they don't believe you or they don't respond in the right way, or actually they're just not interested, they just get bored. So how do we actually understand trust better in order to help us make better decisions? So I'm really excited to be chairing this panel, and I hope you bear with me. I've got some notes here that I need to refer to. So let me just interview our first speaker, so Professor David Chan, who's a professor of psychology from SMU, so Singapore Management University. David is an internationally renowned expert on the measurement of public attitudes and perceptions, and the author of a series of essays called People Matter, which I thought was interesting because one of our early straplines was that life matters and people matter. And this series of essays, I thought, when I looked it up, was really interesting because it looks at the connection between how people feel and what people think and policy making, national policy making, and the importance of that. One interesting fact I discovered about David is that for the first 9 years of his working career, he was a police officer in the Singapore police force, and so had an incredible frontline insight into the importance of people trusting you and the importance of trust in helping manage, I guess, the risks that people face. So David, over to you.
Thank you. Good morning or good afternoon or good evening, depending on which part of the world you are in now. I understand that there are about close to 1,000 of you online, and of course our colleagues and friends in this ballroom today. I have only about 5 to 8 minutes, I was told, to share with you, give you an overview on trust, and I'm going to be very brief because we have a panel about 5, 6 of us. And I thought it's good to just set the stage, and I hope we have some time for discussion, or we can always have a follow-up after the forum, the conference, if you wish, and so on. So obviously, I don't have the time to go through with you the entire science of trust, the translational work as well as the practice of it. So what I'll do is to perhaps set the stage. I won't give you specific examples on Singapore and so on, but I'll give you an overview on the science of trust, on what we know about trust. Right now, trust is not something that we just talk about, that we just say, I've been a leader or I've been working on this area and I know a lot of trust. No, there's actually a big science of trust. somewhere around 10, 15 years ago, I've done a review with my colleague on 17 disciplines, academic disciplines. You look at psychology, management, political science, and so on, and you find that there's quite a bit of research on trust, really. And the interesting thing about trust is that we tend to use trust as if it's one construct, as if it's one word, as if it's monolithic, and that when I say trust and David say trust and you say trust, we are talking about the same thing. Often it is not the case, right? In fact, research has shown that trust is multidimensional. And the first very important thing is, before we talk about trust, have all the angst over trust, and tell people and tell leaders and tell risk communicators how to do things to increase trust, is to understand what we are talking about. And research has told us, and so has practice, is that you can at least divide trust into three main dimensions. Whether it is first is a trust in competence, right? Whether you have the ability, whether the truster in the trustee, the truster is the one trusting, trustee is the one trying to get your trust, whether you have trust in the trustee's competence. So if you ask me, do I trust my Singapore government here in managing the COVID risk and crisis? Basically, if I focus on trust in competence, it is about, do I think, am I confident that the government has the ability to solve the problems and those things that I care about? Which is quite different from the second dimension of trust, which we call trust in integrity. Right? Trust in integrity is about the honesty, about the character of the individual. That is the person really honest? Is the person lying? So when we talk about political leaders, very often integrity is very important, and that's why you have scandals, you have people having to resign, because the moment their integrity is eroded, you know you are about finished. You know, you can't really, you can make a comeback, but at that point in time, people resign from political office. Very often it's not competence, but trust in integrity has been eroded, violated, and they find that they could not just apologize and do a trust repair. Now the third dimension is much harder, but it is probably the most important that many of us as leaders actually forget about, because we remember competence, which is about, can you do it? And we know about character, about who you truly are. But the third one is about trust in benevolence, right? Benevolence, simply to put it in layperson's language, is, do you mean what you say? And do you say what you mean? Which is quite different from honesty. Right? So if I tell you that, oh, the reason I have this policy, the reason I'm issuing this COVID management measure is because of reason A. Now, the person listening to me may say, oh, okay, he really meant it, it is reason A. But if you think actually it's not reason A, it is reason B, and reason A is just to tell you that that is the main reason, but reason B is kind of not really telling you. That is about not saying what you mean and not meaning what you say. So just remember, these three dimensions go a long way. Why? Because I can trust you a lot in your competence, but maybe I'm not trusting your integrity. Correct? So if that is the case, it doesn't help if you keep trying to increase your problem-solving ability if integrity is the issue. So I would argue that before we go anywhere, understand the three dimensions, right? Because of time, I will follow up later if there is a chance. But the second point I just want to make is that trust is dynamic. Right? We cannot assume, just using an Elderman trust barometer, that, oh, Singapore, you are at this trust at this level, country B, you are at this level, so we are doing better. Yes, at that point in time. But trust is very dynamic, right? It can go up and go down, not necessarily gradually, but can be abruptly. What that means for scientists, for consultants, for advisors and leaders is that don't just look at trends analysis. Don't just look at your past few years, and say that, look, my trust is going up, we are doing okay. Because it can abruptly go down or abruptly go up or remain stable. So your past trends analysis doesn't really help, right? It just gives you a reference point. The important thing is to understand the prevailing conditions, as well as what are the typical predictors and drivers of trust. Trust is like resilience, right? During a crisis like COVID, you cannot say, let's build trust. You have to build it early, right? And when trust needs to be called upon, then you draw upon it. And when you do it well, it is unlike political capital where there is a cost and you keep losing. Right? In fact, when you draw on it, and Singapore government, for example, tries to do that, there will be some measures that the population is split. Do you open? Do you not open? Right? And you are not going to please everybody. People who are very concerned with public health will want you to not open up the economy. People who are in small business enterprises will say, please open up. No, it's about lives, about livelihoods. And when whatever you do, you're going to offend somebody. because there will be some contradictions. And therefore, your trust becomes important. But if we believe that your government, in managing this risk, can solve the problem, competence, has the integrity, you're not telling lies to me, and you are benevolent, you say what you mean and you mean what you say. So I'm going to go along with you, suffer a little bit, because it's not just for the collectivist good, but it is ultimately good for me as well. There's an enlightened self-interest in this. So I will just stop here because of time. I hope you have time to come back and talk a little bit, because trust is also multi-level. Scientists versus policymakers is a group-level issue. And the last point I want to leave with you is that when you think about the government might be doing very well, your leadership in the organization might be doing well. All it takes is one person in that team to mess up in any of these dimensions, you can lose trust in the team. Right? So when you are in the leadership team, when you are in the crisis management team, when you are the ministers in the cabinet, for example, you can do very well, but it might take one person to mess up. So do remember that everyone counts, right? Because negativity looms, and the challenge is to use trust, understand it, how to reduce the negativity, promote the positivity so that you can not only co-create solutions, but you can actually handle the risk well enough. And then your science, be it vaccination, be it some other safe management measures, can then be translated into saving lives, livelihood, quality of life, and your ways of life as well. Right? Thank you.
Great, thanks, David. I was thinking of lots of questions there. If anybody, particularly our online audience, has any questions, don't forget to put them in the chat in the online system, and we'll come to those. We'll come to those later. David, you sort of mentioned the Edelman Trust Barometer, which I thought is a pretty interesting poll. The 2021 Trust Barometer called 2021 the year of information bankruptcy. It mainly, the big headline was that, it showed that public trust in governments, business, and the media is currently at an all-time low. One of the headline messages from it was that people no longer know who to trust for reliable information. And interestingly, one of the big messages was that people believe that government particularly, but also business and the media, are purposely trying to mislead them, and that they say things that they know are false. That was one of the messages in the poll. So clearly they don't say what they mean and mean what they say. And that's led to a very low level of trust in that trust barometer. US and China governments, interestingly, were one of the lowest in terms of trust in 2021. And it was identified that this could potentially be one of the biggest drivers in the issue of vaccine hesitancy, with 64% of people that were polled by Edelman said that they were willing to have the vaccine in the next year. Only 64% of people. Which I think brings us on to our second speaker, Professor Heidi Larsen. This is a pre-recorded talk, so it's going to be on the screen. Heidi is a vaccine anthropologist, a professor at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. She's the director of the Vaccine Confidence Project, a WHO Centre of Excellence addressing public vaccine hesitancy, and recently published a new book called Stuck, How Vaccine Rumours Start and Why They Don't Go Away. So an expert very much on vaccine confidence, and is probably going to talk now about why trust particularly is so important in addressing vaccine hesitancy. Can we play Heidi's talk?
Good morning. I'm Heidi Larsen. I'm a professor of anthropology and risk, and I'm happy to be here today to talk with you about some general themes around trust and confidence and how they relate to risk communication, because trust and risk are very important relational. If you have more trust, you'll put up with a little more risk than if you have low trust. I've been working particularly for 15 years, on even 20, on issues around risk communication and vaccines. And we've learned a lot through that research and field experience about what it takes for people to build trust in the vaccines and in the science of vaccines, but importantly also the people who are delivering them and the policies and institutions around them. One of the things that has been particularly insightful for us and important, particularly in the context of COVID, but relevant to other areas, is how do you reach the most difficult communities? How do you build trust with people that, for whatever reasons, are less trusting? They're marginalized, they have less access to information, they've had a bad experience, they've heard a bad experience, or there is some historic memory in the community that they have that lets them be more cautious and more risk averse. So one of the things we've learned in those situations, I'll take polio, for example, people, they want an environment that's familiar. They'll trust more your advice on a vaccine or other intervention. Good morning. I'm Heidi Larsen. Good morning. I'm Heidi Larsen. Good morning. I'm Heidi Larsen. I'm a professor of experience or other intervention. If they feel like it's coming from someone they trust, some familiar environment, and that you don't start by saying what they should trust, because they have their own notions of trust. So we use a lot of dialogue, a lot of listening. Risk communications is as much about listening as it is about telling, about communicating, because you can be talking about a lot of aspects of risk and you're missing the point of what people's real perceived risk are. You may speak in scientific terms about benefit and risk, but if their risks are based on their perception of risks, based on other risks in their life. I worked a lot in HIV, and we were very focused on the risks of HIV. And some of the people we talked to who were in conflict settings or difficult situations said that I'm more worried about being killed in this conflict, or I'm more worried about getting pregnant when I don't want to be pregnant, or I'm worried about being hurt or domestic violence or other things. Depending on the group you're talking to, they have other risks that they're considering. In the case of COVID, we see there's different kinds of risks. You can talk about the risk of the disease, the risk of the vaccine. People are also worried about the risks of losing their job, of other situations where they can't socialize, and that's important in other ways. So I think we have to remember, one, the importance of listening, of dialogue, of understanding what people's perceived risks are before we start teaching and communicating about the benefits and the risks. We want to hear about what their perception is so that we can make sure we tailor the nature of our communication to what their needs are. And most importantly, work with local trusted figures and community members as we move forward. I think that we've seen a tremendous amount of innovation in the context of COVID, which has had horrible consequences, but we've also seen people who were not typically involved with public health more broadly or with vaccines specifically. We've seen restaurant owners in one setting in the Bangladeshi community in London even, who rose to the occasion to say, I got vaccinated, and even to go on WhatsApp with their images to say, this is important, you should get vaccinated. We have been hit hard in our community. If we get vaccinated, I can open my restaurant. We can socialize together. Bring your families together. We have our community back. In other cases, it was barbers and hairdressers who you would not have expected to be partners in this effort, but there are people who are very familiar. There are people that you know, that you have conversations with. So there was one community that used a network of barbers to start talking to and building some confidence among their clients. So think of people that you may not usually think about who are the more familiar ones. And that's part of the listening we need to do. Who are the familiar ones? I hope this was helpful. I do think if there's any takeaway messages, don't forget the importance of listening before communicating. Really pay attention to who are the trusted people in the community that you're trying to reach. Think about the perceived risks, not only what you should communicate. And I think that moving forward, we can build a more trusting community and society. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Heidi. I think that's really interesting, especially for the scientists in the room, the idea that we need to listen more and we need to have a dialogue with people. I think this is a challenge for scientists because scientists sometimes are very passionate about telling people what the science says. You know, you've got to understand the science, you've got to understand the data, and I want to tell you what the data says. And we're not very good sometimes at actually listening or understanding how people feel. And I wonder, does it matter if people don't understand the data? If we listen to people, if we understand where they're coming from, sometimes they might be wrong. They might have the wrong idea about the science or misunderstand the data. And probably as scientists, we want to tell them they're wrong. We want to say, no, you're wrong, let me correct you. But actually, will that get the right response? You know, will that make people safer or healthier or happier? Or can people actually be wrong and have their own perspective and point of view, not understand the science maybe, but get a good outcome, you know, be safer or be less exposed to risk? So I think there's some really interesting challenges there for the scientific community. So our next speaker is online, live, is one of Heidi's colleagues from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, specializes in decision and behavioral sciences. Professor Lisa Lin, an expert in implementing science in the context of public health emergency preparedness. Lisa is the Asia lead for the Vaccine Confidence Project. Sorry, there was an echo there. Has been very busy during COVID and recently worked on a national study in China, a public survey looking at risk communication and behavioral responses to the COVID pandemic. Can you hear us, Lisa?
Yes, I can.
Over to you.
Thank you. So today I'm going to, I prepared slides, so I'm going to share them right now. Are you able to see my slides?
Not yet, Lisa.
No. So on my screen, it shows that I'm sharing the screen. Can tech people help?
Can see them now?
Fantastic. All right. Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. I'm Lisa Lin, and thank you very much for the generous introduction. So I'm part of the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine Vaccine Confidence Project, and colleagues to Professor Heidi Larsen. Thank you for joining the presentation today. And I'll be speaking on vaccine confidence in Asia Pacific countries. So there is growing evidence of vaccine delays or refusals due to a lack of vaccine confidence, along with persisting access issues. Below, I'm going to present on findings from a recent global mapping study of vaccine confidence, which we use Vaccine Confidence Index that developed by Professor Heidi Larsen and the group in a sample of case studies in Asia Pacific between 2015 and 2019. The data would describe the context leading up to the current COVID-19 vaccination. And there are three dimensions of how vaccine confidence measured in this study, which are the importance, safety, and effectiveness of vaccines perceived by people. So the first country that I would like to focus on is in the Philippines. So vaccine confidence had dropped, if you look at the figures, it has dropped significantly by more than 55% between 2015 to 2018 over well-documented fears around the dengue vaccine in 2017. So we were able to track it and then show it on the graph, and then to see such loss of vaccine confidence appears to have also affected uptake of routine vaccinations. Based on recent surveys between March and May 2021, we would like to see like how that has provided a historical context and how that affected COVID vaccination. But then we found that there is a considerable increase in vaccine confidence among Filipinos in nearly 75% about a month since the government rolled out the COVID vaccine, which is good news. In Malaysia, public vaccine confidence was high and stable, as you can see in the graphs. It fluctuating between 65 to 75% before a continuous descending trend since spring 2019. In a recent survey on Malaysian COVID-19 vaccine acceptance, the survey results showed that overall acceptance rate was high, around 85%, with the lowest rates among the elderly and the pensioner. So hesitancy was caused by concerns regarding side effects, safety, lack of information, effectiveness, and then a series of like religious and cultural factors related to COVID-19 vaccines. This set of factors actually was observed across different countries, which is very translatable even before and during COVID. The internet and social media have been main sources of vaccine information in Malaysia. However, misinformation has also been identified as influencing vaccine hesitancy and circulating on these platforms as well. Next country, we're looking at Vietnam. Between 2015 and 2019, public confidence in the safety of vaccines fluctuated at a low level, around 35%. Public confidence in vaccine importance and effectiveness also declined significantly starting in mid-2018. So studies have found that media representation of vaccine side effects has had a negative impact on utilization of vaccination services. So which could be the driver and that explained the decline in vaccine confidence. In a recent survey conducted in April 2021 among health science students, it was reported that close to 80%, so 77% of the participants intended to receive a COVID-19 vaccination when it becomes available. Of course, and this is among a very particular group of people that have a good education, good training in health science, and then they tend to be, and they are younger as well. So Fiji is a small Pacific island nation with a population of around 900,000, is considered the most capable country in the region to handle an outbreak. Back in 2008, the country implemented a successful nationwide HPV campaign targeting all girls aged 9 to 12 years through an existing school-based immunization program. So the public confidence in vaccine safety and importance, we observed that there was a decline between 2015 and 2018. Meanwhile, the percentage of the respondents who strongly agree that vaccines are effective fluctuated around 60% throughout the study period. So during the COVID-19 pandemic, this country has been relying heavily on the WHO, UNICEF, and other international organizations for vaccine access. We also found that social media such as Facebook, Viber, Instagram were found to be the primary sources of COVID-19 vaccine-related information. However, fake news and misinformation about COVID-19 epidemic and vaccines are circulated on these platforms, which have impeded the rollout process. Lastly, we're looking at China. China, we saw a steady increase in the percentage of Chinese respondents perceiving vaccines to be safe, important, and effective since 2015 until the Changchun vaccine incident occurred in 2018. The incident caused a nationwide vaccine crisis and panic among Chinese parents, which had triggered a widespread reform of vaccination supervision and management, and a series of risk communication and community engagement responses from the local public health agencies. In the end, with the effort, the Chinese public confidence in vaccination suffered temporarily, but bounced back quickly, and has not dented routine childhood immunization rates. We see that in a recent survey in May 2020, so last year, this nationwide cross-sectional survey of 3,500 people showed that 95% of the respondents were confident and completely confident in the domestically made COVID vaccines. So in conclusion, vaccine confidence fluctuates. Evidence suggested that vaccination decision-making in this region are influenced by various but similar factors before and during COVID. Like the rest of the world, digital platforms have been identified to be the main sources of fake news and misinformation about COVID-19 epidemic and vaccines for many Asian Pacific countries. And that is it, including the ones that presented here, but also the other ones such as South Korea and Mongolia. Regular monitoring of public sentiment and local immunization rates at the national and subnational levels can help identify populations with declining confidence and acceptance, and then also to provide instant feedback that could inform the timely development of context-tailored interventions. For example, echo to Professor Heidi Larsen was saying, that studies have shown that more communication from healthcare professionals, from trusted messengers, and then providing timely evidence on vaccine safety are proven to be key drivers of vaccine acceptance. So the last point I would like to make is about social amplification of risks. For decision makers, it will be very critical to look at social determinants and individual characteristics while developing interventions, and to understand public sentiment and attitudes towards a vaccine and other risks in order for us to have a really tailored target to the target population for the interventions to be effective. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. I think this issue of trust and confidence since COVID is really interesting. A couple of days ago, the Wellcome Global Monitor was published, which is conducted by Gallup, so one of the Gallup sort of world polls. And this is the largest sort of global study of public attitudes towards science and scientists. And it looked at how trust in scientists has changed since the COVID pandemic. And the data from the latest monitor said that 80% of people from 113 countries trust science more or much more since COVID. And it puts scientists up there as some of the most trusted experts alongside doctors and nurses for the very first time. So clearly there's been quite a big impact in the level of trust placed in the science community since COVID. So our next speaker also is going to join us virtually, Tang Tong. Dr. Tang Tong, who's from the world of disaster risk reduction and public outreach in a disaster risk setting. Tang Tong is from an organization that has an even longer name than the Lloyd's Register Foundation Institute for the Public Understanding of Risk. So I'll try and get it right. Tang is from the Disaster Integrated Risk Monitoring and Early Warning Center of the National Disaster Reduction Center of China. Did I get that right, Tang? Can you hear us? So maybe a few technical problems.
Can you hear
I've just
me?
finished your introduction, Tang. Hopefully you can hear us. Tang is an expert in Earth observation, geospatial technology and remote sensing, and a leader of many public outreach programs in the Earth observation area. Tang, are you okay? Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we're ready for your talk, if you are.
Okay.
I think Tang is having connection problems, maybe. We had some technical problems earlier, I think. Tang. Julian, we might have to come to you. Oh, we're okay. We can see your slides. Yeah. Shall we move on? Do you want to come back? Okay. So we'll move on to our next speaker while we try and fix the issue. So we'll come back to you, Tang, if you can still hear me. So our final, our second final speaker is Dr. Julian Tang, here on the stage. Julian is an expert in science and risk communication. I think for many years was head of research communications at NUS, the National University of Singapore. A very experienced writer and editor, particularly in science and research fields. Julian's currently the editorial director and managing editor for Wild Type Media Group, which is Asia's leading STEM and healthcare media group, and the publishers of the flagship magazine that I think everybody has been given a copy of, Asian Scientist magazine, a special issue on privacy. So Julian, over to you.
Thank you, David. So I believe I have some slides as well, but I can just keep talking. Oh, okay, here we are. So, good day everyone, and to everyone around the world. So thank you for joining us. Now, today I'm just going to talk from the perspective of a scientist, which I was one before in my past life, and also as the managing editor of a science media agency. So I'm not taking sides, I'm just, providing the perspective for how do we get this right? How do we get science and risk communication right? Now, so as we know, the pandemic has challenged the old-fashioned way of communicating science. Of course, traditionally we publish papers, we still do, but now new findings are quickly seized upon by politicians, the media, and the social media, and they spread like wildfire. And the resulting in this so-called infodemic, right? I mean, yes, people do believe in science more, but at the same time, this infodemic has also eroded the credibility and of science, and this can hurt the funding of scientific research. So, what actually went wrong? Now, the thing is that, of course, it's easy to say that, well, the scientists have poor communication management. To a certain extent, it is true, but the media also have a role to play. Now, ideally, scientists will be able to communicate their science or their results, to answer the questions of what did we do and how did we do it. Now, the thing is that, unfortunately, stories that appeal the most to the public and policymakers as well is actually focused on the so what, the impact. They want to know what you have done can actually, or how it can improve. I like that, I haven't seen that before. So I actually focus on the so what. Now this leads to the problem of translating the findings into a media story, all right? So I'm just gonna give you a brief casual example. Okay, so this is published by the University of Exeter. So it's great, it actually says there's this compound that I have to read it just so I don't get it wrong too. So this chemical compound that is found in human flatulence, but also occurring in rotten eggs and cheese, may someday be useful in mitigating the cell damage in certain diseases. Now, that's perfectly fine. It sounds good. But when the media picked it up, it actually became that, right? I don't need to read it out, but you can see, and actually by Time too. So you can see that, but this sells. This actually is great because you can say, well, you know, this is the impact of it, but is it really? Now, then there's another example, which is about a compound that they found by the University of Alberta in Canada. Now, when the PI was interviewed by the media, he actually said, I think the compound could help patient populations who want to exercise but are physically incapable. So this compound could mimic exercise for them or improve the benefits of the modest amount of exercise they can do. So, as a scientist, I'm not going to comment, but he did give the fact that, wow, this is the magic compound that you don't need to, you know, basically can replace exercise. And of course, the media lapped it up. So here we are. I wish that is true too. I love wine. So there you go. As scientists ourselves, and also as a media, and I wear both hats, the thing is that the communication has to be two-way, right? Because if you give information that allows the public to lead to false deduction, then actually the onus is on you. So what we need to know is that as science communicators, scientists or scientific research institutions, we cannot monopolize the knowledge. We cannot drip feed or by piecemeal information to the public. And that's exactly what happened earlier. Just those two lines, and it caused that big hoo-ha about drinking wine, forget about exercise. Now, also, sometimes we think that, well, because we are the experts in a certain field, so therefore we just simplify things for the public. All right, okay, that's great. It's very thoughtful of us to think that way. However, oversimplification can actually become a noise in the communication channel. And that can actually lead to the transmission of false message. And think about it again, social media, your news can spread just like that. And then as an editor, I know that we need to have an editorial introduction when we write a piece of science feature or story. However, we need to examine the metaphor of choice, talk to people about it, and not just, you know, weave something in which could actually backfire. It could muddle the message, all right? So as the saying goes, it's not la polar, not art for the sake of doing art. We need to communicate with a specific audience in mind and try to fine-tune that balance. And only we as scientists can do it because we know our work well. So we can adjust the level of complexity that we want to communicate to, whether it's to our fellow scientists or to the general public. Now, there's also this inaccurate, which has been discussed by my fellow panelists earlier, is that scientists and science are often misunderstood. And the popular media has a role to play in this because scientists are often depicted as capable of solving any disasters, right, like superheroes. Now, because of that, the public actually lack an understanding that scientific method, it involves questioning, testing, and revising. All right, nothing is absolute, and that is science on its own. So the thing is that the public also need to understand this. Just because one scientist says something, it doesn't mean that it's absolutely true. And that's the reason why science actually corrects itself. As the Nobel laureate Peter Doherty said, if you want to know the absolutes, go ask a politician or the poet. And that is true. So what do we do about it then, right? I keep painting this picture of doom and gloom. It's like scientists are bad, media is bad. But okay, forget about who's bad and who's great. So what do we do about it? Now, one obvious thing is that we need to nourish the science and public partnership. And actually, scientists has a big role to play because they need to be dedicated to communicating their work to a broader audience beyond just scientific publication. All right, scientists think that, okay, I publish a paper in Nature, that's the be all and all. It's not that. Well, the thing is that you want to extend the impact of your work, and going beyond that, going beyond the scientific community is one way of doing that. And also, the institutions themselves need to be supportive, all right, of managing this relationship. And if all else fail, well, hire a science media agency. Now, the thing is that also we need to train people to communicate science. I mean, we keep talking about, well, talk about your science, talk about risk, but without training, the message can be misinterpreted, and then it will just backfire. So basically, scientists also need to influence the public directly, and they need to show tenacity, tactfulness, good listening, and empathy. If you look at those, these are very general traits of a likable person, all right, of a good person. So yes, trust actually is one thing. Trusting you is one thing. I may not like you, but I may like you, but I don't trust you. I may like you to, as a drinking buddy. Let's go drink wine and not exercise. But it's not about that. You need to be likable and relatable before the trust can be cultivated and before they will listen to you. Now, as scientists, we also need to understand that just because someone is sent to interview you doesn't mean that that person has a background in science writing. So you need to have that empathetic nature to understand that. And also it's our duty as scientists to help the writers communicate that. So, and yeah, as scientists, we tend to be very good with a lot of things except for perhaps social media, communication channels. But it's very important to have a working knowledge of what are the communication channels that you can use to talk to the public directly. And of course, the potential pitfall of, nothing is perfect, so you need to know the pitfalls of each of those channels. So I'm going to briefly say that, okay, social media is not all bad, but because, well, social media users actually have a greater chance of encountering news, and also because of the recommendation as well, based on their reading habits. And as users, as a lay person, a person on the ground, we want to hear directly from the experts. Why do we need to go through the middleman? You see, that's the thing. There are two levels of trust that we need. If we were to get news from the journalists or from the media, you need to trust the media, and then you need to trust the scientists. Why not just build that trust with one person, and that is directly with the experts themselves? But having said that, which I'll be happy to talk more about later, we need to consider the individualism and the PDI, the power distance index of each of the society that we're communicating to. So, yes, and that's the thing. I mentioned that, you need to be likable or relatable. So when we communicate science, we also need to ensure that the source is someone that people can see themselves being represented, someone who is relatable. Not unlike, the new Marvel movies and all that. We see ourselves, whether you're Asian, a lady, or a minority, people like to be represented, and they would naturally want to listen, right? So in fact, there are studies who show that in the US, people who trust science are generally non-liberal male. So that's the thing. It's very important that it's a representation that female scientists can step forward to communicate risk and science. Now, as I mentioned, trust is one thing, but being relatable and likable. Now, I want to just point out quickly about this Pew Research study that was done. So, of 20 countries, one thing that Singapore stands out is that people trust the government the most, followed by the military and the scientists. Now, with that in mind, I think we know what we have to do, the work that we need to do. All right. So now what? Quickly, yes, we need to get into the two-way communication. And of course, a lot more research is needed to focus on that two-way communication. And Asia, being such a diverse continent, requires a lot more work. All right, so I'm just going to quickly go through this. I think I've got a minute, so I love the luxury of time. So I'm just going to go through this article quickly, and then it's up for discussion, or we can talk about it later. This was actually published on the 9th of November, just a little 2 weeks, a month ago, in the Straits Times. Of course, we were having news about booster shots, and a lot of people were like, well, if I have 2 Pfizer, should I get Moderna or the other way around? So the article starts with, so I removed names and whatever, so no need to pinpoint anyone. So basically, the Ministry of Health director actually said, well, it's fine to get a different mRNA vaccine as a booster, and say that, well, he took 2 Pfizer before, and the third one was Moderna, the booster was Moderna, partly out of convenience. Well, not a lot of information there for the public to make a decision. And then at the same press conference, the health minister himself said, well, you know, he also did the same. He had 2 Pfizer followed by Moderna, but no reason given. So then as the public, I'm like, okay, I listened, I read it, but I still can't make a decision. Then randomly, they brought in a business development manager and said that, well, she chose Moderna because she has a very bad experience with, because she heard that, okay, Moderna has a higher efficacy rate. Okay, she heard. Now, this is the thing. Where is the trust and where is the evidence? And then they bring in a study in the US, which is kind of, okay, you know, that's a bigger sample population, but at the same time, we are here in Asia. And then there are some Singapore doctors, local doctors, who actually say that, well, there's no difference between the 2 mRNA vaccine. And then another say that, well, they should work just as well. Again, if you are a public member looking for this information to make a decision, up until this point, there's no help at all. And then it went on to say, well, some opted for non-RMA vaccine, and then a public health expert actually say that, well, you know, booster shots are fine. It's just little side effects like arm pain and fever and all that. So it's a personal preference. That's the key word here. Now, what does that mean in terms of science? So the bottom line is, well, the Greeks believed that philosopher, you know, a philosopher is someone who loves the truth, and the English thinks that a gentleman is someone who values integrity of his word. So, but I think that, you know, to build up on what my fellow panelists have said, nothing can be effective as, you know, as effective as having a daily visibility, build up that trust, that likability, and the relatability, and for that, as scientists, then we can communicate our science and to increase the chance of people listening to us. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Julian. So I think we're going to move on to our Q&A now, unless Tang is online. Yep. So we've got some time for Q&A. I think we've got about 20 minutes. So if anybody in the audience wants to ask a question, just give us a wave. We've got some roving mics, I think, and they'll come to you and you can ask your question. I think we've got 2, so we could line up a couple of questions. If you're in the online audience and you'd like to ask a question, just type your question in and submit it, and it'll come up on my iPad, and we can ask some questions there. Just to get us started, I've got a quick question on, I'd quite like to understand better the psychology of how we build trust and confidence in members of the public. And I guess one of the questions in my mind is, what should the balance be, or what's the relative importance between communicating knowledge, you know, and the scientific data and the information, versus understanding people's emotional responses, people's sort of, the way they feel and the way they understand it. Is there a balance there that we need to get right? Is one more important than the other? Probably for David.
Yeah, well, I'm going to speak from a scientific perspective of actual data. I can't summarize all of them here, that what we already know, and many of you, probably the anecdotal evidences may actually converge as well. I think it is really very important to not box people together and say, you know, scientists are like this, politicians are like this, media are like this. The heterogeneity empirically is pretty great. And it might be a bit misleading to compare also groups, say, within a country, if, for example, the differences is very trivial, or also when the differences in the ranking could simply change over time. Right? So the first point is do remember boxing people into labels unless you have very clear empirical data. Do be a little bit careful. Often the empirical data show otherwise because if it's dynamic and also across country differences, and there are real data to support that. So that's the first point. So I would caution against saying that even social media is not trustworthy, mainstream is, or nobody's trusting mainstream media anymore, and so on. That kind of statements is not very helpful. Number 2, inter-country comparisons is also a little bit dangerous because the members of public, the people that you want to convince for a better life, is doing intra-individual comparisons. So if you ask Singaporeans, do you trust the government? What matters really is, do you trust the government for certain actions? And how is my trust in my government different from my trust in the government several weeks ago, months ago, and years ago? Singaporeans don't quite care. Is my trust level with the government higher or lower than China, than US, and so on? We don't care. We might feel good, political leaders might feel good, because what matters to action is changes intra-individual, therefore intra-country and not inter-country. So don't get too fixated over, is Philippines doing better or China is doing better and so on. No, those are important, not irrelevant reference point, but please bear in mind, as leaders, it is intra-individual.
So I'm not sure if I can say
matters,
anything, or should I turn my, I should mute myself.
Your trust changes,
but,
your, how you feel, how you think, and how you act. A, B, C. A is affect, how you feel. B is behavior, how you act. And C is cognition. I'll just round off by saying,
but I don't dare to turn off my video either.
Right? Exactly. You are trying to shape the change, take the perspective from the other person.
But anyway, since we're here, so hi, ni hao.
It's much more than just empathy, right? Take the perspective, which you don't have to agree, but once you understand the perspective where the person and the segment of the population you are trying to affect comes from, research has shown that it is much more effective, and that requires effort. And as I said again, don't label individuals. Just a final point that social media is important, but don't demonize it. Mainstream media is important too. There will be people who don't have social media access. In certain countries, a lot of the elderly population has no idea what a smartphone is. And those are the individuals you need to influence as well, right? Especially when it comes to vaccination, because they need more help. They are vulnerable groups. The fatality rate is higher. Those are really quite important.
Thanks, David. Do we have Lisa and Heidi on with us? Are they on the screen? We've got a question.
在看我们，但是 I'm not sure.
Lisa, can you hear us?
We can't hear anything.
We've got a question, I think, for Lisa.
Oh, hi. I didn't hear the question, and then we have some technical issues here.
Okay, I'll try asking the question. So the question is, have the panelists seen any obvious signs of decreased trust across different pandemics? So, for example, comparing COVID-19 to SARS, or I think somebody mentioned polio earlier, or in Africa, Ebola. Is there anything we can learn from comparisons between different pandemics? Lisa, maybe you could start us off.
I think that actually, during current COVID, I think given, well, first of all, each epidemic is different. And then because it is different because the risk involved is different. The threat to human health, the level of threat is different. And therefore, I think that, and obviously the way that media is portraying it, the public, like the politicians, how they talked about it, communicating the message were very different. And therefore, I think that for example, like I remember 2010 during H1N1, initially it was presented as a very deadly disease coming from between the border of the US and Mexico. And then, however, as it turned out, it was not as lethal as we initially thought, but then it did trigger a widespread panicking, and then also the discussion about how to respond to this, to that epidemic. However, that at that time there were also like eroded trust, and then also it also exposed the social, like the social inequity that's existing in the current system. And then so it's not things that we are observing right now during COVID is nothing new. I would say that nothing would be a too absolute term. I usually avoid to use that word, but anyway. So so things that we learn from the past, that's something that we noticed this time during COVID, is that things that we learn from the past is we could definitely translate it to the current epidemic and current response. Things are quite different, is that the power of social media 10 years ago was not the same level as it is now. I remember there were we did a research back in 2010. At that time, the prevalence of like use, so the percentage of people that using social media as a main source for like disease information and information about vaccination was much lower than it is now. Traditional media plays a much larger role around that time. But then now with social media and with all different platforms, it becomes more difficult to track just because, like Professor Heidi Larsen was saying about social listening, the listening effort is a lot more significant and require tremendous efforts right now. And then also is more, but then it also allowed us to hopefully to like have more understanding of the audience and the target population that who are using it, and hopefully for us to be able to provide a more tailored communication messages and interventions for us to address the risk and then to address the trust. So and therefore, so from the data that I just presented earlier, I wouldn't say the public trust is lower now compared to before. We see a trend that goes up and comes down. But then I think after COVID vaccine rolled out, we definitely see an increasing trend of trust in the vaccine. I think partially because when people are seeing more people taking the vaccine and turn out to be okay, I think it also provides, and then you have more people around you that taken the vaccine. It also helped to communicate the vaccine confidence, and then also to encourage people to take the vaccine. But obviously, as we are moving along, now we have a new variant with unknown effect with the current COVID vaccine, and then we're also moving into a new target population, which could be children, primary school children. So these challenges will be very different. Like people might feel comfortable taking the vaccine themselves, but not sure that if they want their children under a certain age to take them. And therefore, I would like to say that we should not take public trust for granted. And therefore, but then for each individual to make those decisions, they are calculating the risk and benefit in their mind, which may be the same way as or different ways compared to experts when they do their calculation. But then it is for us, our role is to understand how what are the factors that influencing those like the public, how they calculate information, the risk and benefits, and then also how we can provide effective messages and to help them to make the decisions that will help their to promote their health. Over.
Thanks, Lisa. I think David's got a comment.
Yeah, just 1 minute follow up on what Lisa said. It is important to distinguish SARS and what we have in COVID right now. It's a little bit different in terms of managed crisis management. Right, in the case of SARS, it's relatively short-lived. It's not as global. You don't have not only social media, but the news bombarding you every day that actually affects directly your way of life, your quality of life, your lives and your livelihood. So the number of people that you know that died or passed away, that suffering or have lost his job or her job, and the children go to school, you actually have friends, or at most 1 degree of freedom, your friends, very close friend. So they become very real. That's number one, unlike SARS. Number two, it is long. It has been 2 years. Right? All the other things that we have in your lifetime has never been 2 years, right? It's unprecedented. And because it is such that all we learn and know about risk communication and crisis management needs a little bit of adaptation, right? Because I can trust you, but if you keep on asking me to do something for 2 years, I get fatigued. And those things need to come in, right? In a lot of crisis incidents, when the building collapses, the government comes out, do this, recovery, resilience, it is short-lived, right? Now it is different. Now it is 2 years. And just when you think everything is opening up with borders, comes Omicron. Omicron sounds like a transformer. It is going to transform, and the things are going to be different. So your reservoir of trust becomes so important because now you are asking a split population to do things which they have done for 2 years. But then just when they thought that things are getting better, they have more anxiety, more uncertainty, and people have lives and livelihoods to deal with. It is not an easy thing, so we do have to bear in mind it's a little bit unprecedented, and therefore you need to draw on multiple disciplines because the world is not compartmentalized into one discipline. So your infectious disease expert is not a psychologist. Your psychologist is not a medical doctor, right? So you have to draw on all these individuals to work together.
Thanks, David. We've got one more question, which I think is for Julian. Julian, this question is about the sort of role of social media, and particularly around the fact that I think some governments are concerned about how social media can spread bad messaging or fake news. Could you comment on the role of social media and maybe what governments or what individuals can do to improve that?
Yep. So as I mentioned earlier, social media is not all bad, but at the same time, it has caused a lot of problems. Now, the thing is that this is the role and the active role that the scientific community has to play. It's because you have the authority and the responsibility to actually correct misinformation. Right, because the public, you can't just leave it to the public. They won't know that it's misinformation or fake news if they just don't know it's fake. They will just take it that this is news. All right? And so as scientists, we need to call them out. So we need to, we can't just ignore the fact that social media is happening and that people do get news from social media and people believe things that are being spread around. So as governments, I think, the government should actually encourage experts to engage the public themselves. I know there's a lot of rules and conditions that, the academics should not talk to the public directly, but it doesn't take a lot and it will not break any, rule or something to actually correct things online. And I've done it myself, to be honest. There was this news about a certain, hawker center being closed down when there's actually no such things. But they show a different picture and then they show a few hawker centers being closed down and that caused a panic. And I saw all the comments about people like, oh no, we can't with this and that. And I actually went in to correct. It's like, no, there's nothing like that. And so if you know it for a fact, and if you have, and I know it for a fact because, I was just there. So I think it's up to us to correct that. So don't keep an eye closed, don't keep a blind eye to it. Turn a blind eye to it. Just, it's everyone's duty to do that.
Great. Thanks, Julian. I think we're out of time. We're now on minus 18 seconds. So I hope you enjoyed the session. I've got loads more questions, so I might need to talk to you guys later. Thanks to people who joined us online. And Tang, I'm sorry you didn't get to speak. I hope you've still been able to hear us. So if we could just have a big round of applause for the whole panel online and on the stage.